Okay, stand by media. Two, one, and
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending yet another press briefing from Ilara Court as we update the nation on some of the developments with regard to the COVID-19. On Thursday, the 19th of this month, Barbados would have informed all of our international travel trade partners of our policy decision that we would be instituting a mandatory period of 14 days of quarantine for all visitors who arrived in Barbados and whose passage began either in the United States of America, in the United Kingdom, or on continental Europe. Almost immediately as that information was put into the international marketplace, three things began to happen. First of all, there was a dramatic escalation in the level of cancellations which were being recorded both in the airline industry and across the accommodation sector. When I say the accommodation sector, I mean the traditional hotels, the shared accommodation such as Airbnb, Flip Key, HomeAway, etc., and of course the villa market. The second thing that happened was that consequent upon that dramatic decline in or dramatic escalation in cancellations of bookings, we saw an equally dramatic decline in the loads which airlines servicing us commercially were carrying. And quite frankly, some of the figures which were being recorded began to show that it would be commercially unviable to sustain a number of routes. Almost at the same time as that happened, travel advisories were issued by some of our major host markets, source markets, indicating to their nationals that they ought not to travel anywhere in the world. So, for example, the United Kingdom Foreign and Commonwealth Office would have issued a travel advisory urging all British nationals to stay home. The European Union has issued a European Union-wide travel advisory. The Canadian government has done the same thing. And of course, you know, the United States of America has done the same thing. In the cases of the United Kingdom and Europe, it has also meant a consequential implication for availability of travel-related insurance, and that has only further complicated the matter. So that I am today giving you an update as to where we are with regard to airlift into Barbados and such steps that we are taking in order to manage this situation. First of all, I want to do it by a market by market basis, beginning with Europe. Europe, as you know, is serviced, or Barbados is serviced from Europe by two commercial carriers. Lufthansa's Eurowings, which does a winter contract with us, and that winter contract was scheduled to come to an end in the middle of April. As of the 23rd of March, which is tomorrow Monday, Lufthansa will cease or suspend its operations into Barbados for the rest of winter. The second commercial carrier that services Europe would be Condor, and they suspended their operations indefinitely as of Friday. Right now, both airlines are focusing primarily on the repatriation of their passengers who they brought into the country. And of course, these people would largely be citizens of the various states in Europe, primarily Germany. In the case of Condor, given the European Union's travel advisory and given our situation in Barbados, we will begin discussions with Condor again once the circumstances are appropriate here, and equally once the circumstances are appropriate in Europe. The next market I would want to speak to is Caribbean and Latin America. The Caribbean and Latin America, let us deal first of all with the Caribbean. It is serviced by LIAT, and it is also serviced by Air Antilles and Caribbean Airlines. The situation with regard to LIAT as we speak is still pretty much as it has always been. There have, of course, overnight been some indications of sister CARICOM states taking decisions with respect to their own borders. And therefore the situation is very fluid. As Minister of International Transport, I must tell you that it is my hope that shareholder governments will be as faithful as possible to the determination made by the board very recently to the effect that reduced and revised schedules should, where possible, be maintained. And that is obviously because of the fact that we anticipate the need for a number of various forms of assistance to be offered from Barbados to the rest of the CARICOM region. With regard to Air Antilles, Air Antilles has indicated that their services will be suspended from Monday, the 23rd of March, and that will continue indefinitely until such time as we feel that there is a satisfactory abatement of the situation confronting us. I should speak also to COPA, because COPA is the flight that takes us, the airline that takes us into Panama. The circumstances in Panama are very similar to those in the European Union and the United Kingdom, where the government has also issued a travel advisory. And we have obviously indicated to them that it would be ideal if we were able to suspend the flights until such time as the situation in Panama has abated, and obviously until such time as we are confident about the circumstances here in Barbados. And therefore, with effect from Friday gone, the COPA airline flight would have been suspended. I turn now to the UK market. The UK market, as you know, is serviced by Virgin Atlantic on a commercial basis and also by British Airways. Virgin Atlantic has taken a position that they will suspend their services to Barbados with effect from Monday, the 23rd of March, which is tomorrow. The issue of repatriation of UK nationals and other people who traveled here on Virgin is ongoing, and repatriation flights began as recently as yesterday. There will be a 747 service in the country today and again tomorrow with regard to repatriation. To the extent that that does not complete the full process of repatriation, discussions have been taking place with British Airways, which has entered into a cooperative arrangement with Barbados and with Virgin, so that any persons who did not make it out on Virgin's flights should be able to do so on British Airways, which in turn will continue to fly to Barbados until at least the 26th of March, as is currently anticipated. I cannot be more definitive at this stage as to when British Airways will suspend, because I am going to have a meeting with their head of network planning tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock our time. The reality is that the situation with British Airways is very fluid. They are planning at present to bring a complete cessation to their global network, which is 280 planes and approximately 45,000 employees. And obviously what we are discussing with British Airways is the desirability of maintaining at least a once weekly flight between the United Kingdom and Barbados, because of the very important issues of being able to freight into this country medical supplies, food, and other supplies which are necessary to make sure that we can tide the country through this difficult period. Those discussions continue to be ongoing with a view to making sure that we are not in any way cut off from the UK market. Similarly, with the United States of America, the United States of America is serviced commercially by American Airlines and Jetblue. Let me speak first of all to American Airlines. American Airlines has suspended its operations today, tomorrow, Tuesday, and they will resume on Thursday. Today, tomorrow, Tuesday, and Wednesday. They will resume on Thursday. On Thursday, American Airlines will continue to fly twice weekly from Miami to Barbados, and they will fly once weekly from Charlotte, North Carolina to Barbados until the 1st of April. That gives enough time for American Airlines to repatriate its passengers, and also for us to continue to have some connectivity with the United States of America. Again, for a number of reasons, including the fact that there are Barbadians who are trying to come home. People have students who are children who are studying overseas who wish to come home, and we have to be able to facilitate that. And equally, there are obviously a number of supplies that the island continues to depend on. As we go forward, Jetblue will suspend in fact, yesterday, Jetblue suspended its operations into Barbados, but will continue on a weekly basis to service the island on a direct flight from New York City to Barbados on Saturdays for an indefinite period of time. If demand requires, JetBlue has agreed that they will increase that service to Barbados to twice weekly, but at this stage, none of us are very confident that that demand will exist in the immediate future. But those arrangements have been put in place so as, again, to make sure that Barbados continues to be in a position where the island is not cut off from access to the United States, and again is in a position where we can continue to benefit from access to necessary supplies, pharmaceuticals, equipment, etc. With regard to Canada, Canada is serviced by WestJet commercially and also by Air Canada. Let me speak first of all to WestJet. WestJet will has ceased its worldwide operations with effect from yesterday, and that the issue of when or if they recommence is something that we will have to wait and see what transpires. With regard to Air Canada is bringing their operations to a halt globally by the 31st of March. We will continue to have the benefit of a Toronto flight until just around that time, and thereafter discussions are taking place that will allow us, hopefully if the discussions go well, to again have at least a once weekly flight, if not twice weekly, from Barbados to Toronto, again with a view to ensuring that the island maintains some connectivity to that market, and obviously to facilitate the country with those things that we need to import from that particular locality. The Montreal flight has been suspended. Barbados-Montreal flight has been suspended with effect from yesterday. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the travel trade partners for their cooperation, especially those legacy carriers which have gone above and beyond the call of duty in an effort to meet us halfway in order to ensure that the island itself is not cut off from the international community, because as you know, there is really no way of Barbados provisioning itself. We have no airline of our own to do the kind of transatlantic carrying that we would have to do, and therefore everything else now really becomes a question of trying to get into the melee and the crowd, which are all lining up to get chartered flights and so on and so forth in order to make sure that they can provision their countries and obviously keep their people going to the extent that it is necessary to import commodities. I would now wish to open the floor for any questions.
You spoke about the flights. Any word on the hotels? Because yesterday it was coming in that these hotels were also closed.
You want to use the microphone?
Could you give us an idea of what is happening with the hotel sector? Because all yesterday word was coming in that these hotels were closing temporarily.
Fair question. There are, I think, 81 or 82 hotels which are registered with the Barbados Hotel Tourism Association. There are some hotels that operate in Barbados that are not actually members of the BHTA, and therefore I cannot speak definitively for them. But up to this stage, my understanding is that there are approximately 37 of those 81 hotels which have responded or have indicated what their intentions are. And as you would appreciate, as I began by saying, this situation is very fluid. We made the announcement about the mandatory period of 14 days quarantine on Thursday. And immediately it triggered certain reactions in the international marketplace because people who have saved for a vacation are not going to come here and spend 14 days sitting down in quarantine. So therefore, the change in bookings and the cancellations and so on is still something that a lot of hotels are trying to grapple with. Bottom line is that I believe that we will have about 24 closures recorded up to this point. When I say recorded, that is 24 hotels indicating an intention to close. I do know for a fact that of those 24, 10 have indicated that they want to use the period of closure to do substantial renovations. So there is some usefulness in that because it allows the particular properties which are doing the renovation to come out of this in a refurbished and more competitive state. There are 9 which have indicated that they would want to use the process again for maintenance and upgrading as opposed to substantial renovations, which is perhaps a scale down, but again helps to refresh the plant and make the hotel more competitive. And there are 4 which have thus far indicated a willingness or an interest in using their plant if the need arises as a location where we can do quarantining of people who may need to be quarantined if Barbados does not have sufficient quarantine facilities available otherwise.
Which 4 are those hotels?
Let me say to you that I would want to tell you the names of all 4, but in each case, there are discussions ongoing with staff. There are discussions ongoing in one case with the consortium that actually owns it, so that some of the people who own it and are in Barbados are in agreement, but they now have to talk to people who are overseas. And it would be a little bit, and again, the Ministry of Health also has to approve the sites. So it would be a little bit previous of me to give you the names of all 4, but suffice it to say that up to midnight last night, when I came off the phone for the last time on this matter, we have tentatively 214 rooms which might be available for the purposes of quarantining in hotels if the need arises. There's obviously the possibility for more to be added to the mix, but that is up to midnight last night.
You didn't mention Caribbean Airlines. What is the
I beg your pardon. Sorry. Yes, Caribbean Airlines. And again, that is one where, again, Trinidad, I think, has issued some comment early this morning. I was made aware of it to the effect that they may also make adjustments to their borders. And that situation is one that I could not speak definitively to because we would now have to have discussions with Trinidad to see exactly what the implications for that are. Let me say to you that the airport here has been approached by none less than the World Food Organization with a view to our availability for the purposes of onward transmission of necessary items, largely commodities and food and so on, which may be necessary to be distributed across the sub-region of CARICOM. It is one of the realities of a humanitarian type of assistance. And quite frankly, it is one of the realities, as I've pointed out, that we have to face ourselves in terms of being able to keep ourselves sustained, because none of us know when this comes to pass, when this comes to an end. And therefore, part of the dialogue that we have to have with our colleague states in CARICOM going forward is the need for us to be able to access them if the need arises and the terms on which they will be accessed. And that is why the issue of closing borders becomes a very, very delicate one, because there are a lot of collateral issues that can come about as a result of that.
I'm very glad you mentioned that, because I was also wondering if Liat will be, based on what you said, if Liat will, even if they don't have commercial flights, if they'll be still used to create the I wouldn't say mandatory, but the necessary in-transit trade between the islands for food, medicine, etc.
Yes, and again, also the movement of some services, because again, we have to understand that there are a number of services offered in Barbados that are not easily accessed in other parts of the Eastern Caribbean, and it is often very necessary for Barbadian service suppliers, service providers to be able to access. And I suspect that once this is talked through and thought through very carefully, that we will all come to a common understanding that there is probably going to be a need for there to be a reduced and perhaps revised type of schedule, because obviously LIAC cannot function and stay afloat doing the kind of scheduling that it now does, given this current environment. But by the same token, I am anticipating confidently that a level-headedness will prevail across the region, and we will understand that for, as you say, for the purposes of provisioning and also for the purposes of providing services, there's going to be a need to have mutuality of access across borders to some degree.
I have one other question, and this is regarding Barbados itself, given the fact of the limitation to 25 people. How advisable, or what is the position then regarding staycation with the local population, given the limitation of 25 in a given area?
Ian, it is a very important question. You know, and it goes again to the fluidity of this situation. When I addressed the BHTA last Wednesday, I believe it was, or Tuesday, I felt confident then that the idea of staycations was something that we could try to do in Barbados in order to help keep people employed and help keep hotels open. The reality is that the circumstances have changed a lot in less than a week. I don't want to say it is impossible to do a staycation, because there are hotels which have indicated definitively. I told you about the ones that said they will close, but there are some that have said they will remain open. I think it is important for us to understand that where it is possible, we would want to encourage Barbadians to make that type of contribution towards making sure that our brothers and sisters can remain employed. But obviously we have to do that in a very balanced way, measuring all the risk and so on associated with it. So I can't say yes or no to the idea of staycations. I do say to you, however, that there are hotels that are going to remain open. There are hotels that are interested in doing that type of business. And I think it would be a question of the extent to which you then participate and the way in which you participate. Obviously, sitting at the bar all night long and so on may not be what you may wish to do. But again, I don't think that at present there's a difficulty in going discreetly and having a little time with your significant other or your children at the beach. So, you know, it's a question of personal discretion.
For visitors who might not be able to get out before the flights are suspended, what provision are we making for those persons?
All of the airlines that I've spoken to have been committing to a process of repatriation. So that for those that suspended almost immediately, let us take, for example, Condor and there's one other, I can't remember, but let's use Condor. With regard to them, obviously the connections would have to be utilized, and we would expect that you would go back through the United Kingdom to get onto Europe. And a similar type of approach would take place for those people. Yes, the other one was COPA. You can get back to Panama via the United States of America. And so those types of cooperative arrangements would be in place so as to ensure that people can get back to the point from which they departed as seamlessly as is possible in the circumstances. And again, one of the reasons why we have tried in the case of the United Kingdom and also in the case of the United States of America to make sure that we continue to have those types of operations for as long as possible is to make sure that we remove the challenge of persons being able to get home.
Yeah, ever since Thursday, when we took a decision that we would quarantine all persons coming into Barbados for 14 days, how many visitors have come in since then, and have they all been? Could you give an indication of the number of visitors who have still been coming in and whether they're all in quarantine facilities?
I can tell you that all who would have come from the United States of America or the United Kingdom or Europe would have had to go through a process of mandatory quarantine. I could not tell you how many, and that mandatory quarantine is in the case of Barbadians, for example, coming back home, and many would have been Barbadians returning home, under the watchful supervision of the port health authorities. And at present, that is being allowed within your own home environment, if that is an appropriate environment. Obviously, as we have come to an element of community spread on island, it therefore becomes necessary for us to look at broadening the base of quarantine facilities, and that is why the discussion with hotels has begun, because that gives us an opportunity to use plant that is already established. You don't have to come and build it and spend a lot of money. And as long as we can enter into an appropriate arrangement with the Ministry of Health and also the labor movement, then it is an option that is immediately available to the government.
Yes, sir. Sita and BeijingReporter.com again. In terms of the airport, and I know that the Defence Force had received hand sanitizer, I was wondering what is the position with Grantley Adams International Airport and or Barbados Port Incorporated?
With regard to hand sanitizer?
Yes, please.
I have with me the CEO of Grantley Adams International Airport, Mr. Terry Lane, and I'm going to ask him if he can field that question, because I couldn't answer that personally.
Good morning, and thank you, Ian, for the question. The airport has on hand a supply of hand sanitizer that is being used at this point in time, and we are not worried about the availability of such. We have actually, obviously, as a result of the virus, we have increased the instances of hand sanitizers being made available, especially in the area of arrivals. I think we're all aware that all persons have to use the kiosks. So we have placed sanitizers there. We have our representatives as you come into the hall, making sure that you're sanitizing. And what I can say is, as of today, we're not worried about the supply that we have on hand. We have sufficient, and we have additional on the way into Barbados as well. Thank you.
We spoke about hand sanitizer, but we would have seen video surfacing yesterday of
a mass exodus of people trying to exit the island, and of course they were all congregated. That raises some concerns about, we are supposed to be practicing social distancing. Has the airport put anything in place to ensure that that does not happen? Because I saw there are quite a few flights scheduled for tomorrow as well.
I saw the photos and the videos, which were not yesterday. They were of a different day. And what we're doing, we're working with our airline partners to make sure that we are following the directions given by the government with regards to maintaining an appropriate distance. On the flip side, we have to balance that with the fact that we have a lot of visitors that are looking to leave. So we're working with our airline partners to make sure that we can meet those requirements at this time. Yeah.
Minister, what about the crew members on board the cruise ships that are docked off Barbados? Have they all been repatriated to their countries, or are they still on board the ship?
The current situation is that no shore leave is being given, and there are still a number of ships which I think would have some crew on it. First issue was to repatriate, obviously, those people whose itineraries were truncated or stopped in midstream. And that process, I believe, comes to a complete end tomorrow morning. I think we may actually be down to the point now where we have 2 or 3 flights left to complete that process. And what you would have seen yesterday is the convoys taking them up in a security bubble from the port to the airport, where they would have been carried to the side of the aircraft and boarded. So the question of shore leave, I think the Prime Minister would have addressed earlier this week, and that has been suspended, and it continues in that vein.
Some of the measures that you have outlined today, there's some people who are of the view that many of these more stringent measures should have been taken a little while ago, and as the situation in relation to the number of recorded cases starts to increase, there seems to be a general feeling that more could have been done to shut down non-essential travel a lot earlier, perhaps a week ago, like some other CARICOM nations have done. How does the administration defend its position?
Well, I think that the issue really is that I had used a phrase just now, which I should not have used as I reflect on it. I think I had used the phrase community spread. We have not gotten there. In-country transmission, I think is the correct phrase. And we had not seen any in-country transmission or recorded any cases of COVID-19 prior to this week. And the reality is that to close the borders, as I just indicated to you, quite frankly, or rather to bring a cessation to touristic-related travel, automatically brings a complete cessation to business for a vast cross-section of this country. So that the next issue, while I understand fully the point you're making, the next issue that we have to balance is how then do we deal with the unemployment fallout? And how then do we manage all of the social implications for that? May I say to you that right now that is an ongoing headache for several thousand Barbadians. I mean, take for example the taxi operator who recently spent some money getting a loan and then committed to a vehicle that will in all likelihood be underutilized, if utilized at all, during the course of the next couple of months. That loan has to be dealt with. What we have done is to go to Parliament on Friday and to put in place, or we've announced that there is in place now an arrangement with the banking community so that we can give a moratorium for at least 6 months for businesses which have indicated that or demonstrated that they are suffering as a result of the COVID-19 experience. But you can go on and on. The knock-on effect in terms of unemployment is quite substantial and quite significant. I was just asked a question here about how many properties have closed or will close. And at this stage, even though we have not gotten more than just under 50% of the properties feeding back, we already know that we're likely to have 24 closures. That means that there has to be a provision made for those people for at least 6 months for severance payment. And again, on Friday, we went to Parliament and we have put in place the arrangements for there to be an accelerated receipt of those funds. But these are part of the knock-on and consequential effects that we have to balance against. And it would have been leaning very heavily on the other side and perhaps not balancing the risk if one decided before there was any evidence of either in-country transmission or even a case in Barbados to simply say that you're going to close the borders. I may, to give to you one last very important point. Even as we've taken this position, we all know that there's precious and essential equipment that must be brought into Barbados still. The Prime Minister made the point on Friday in Parliament that the issue of ventilators being accessed is something that we are still doing. And then having accessed those ventilators, we must transport them here. Are we to put them on a boat and let them sail across the Atlantic for 3 to 4 weeks? Answer, no, because several people will die. So you have to be able to fly them in. The issue of medication, again, there's a need for it to be air freighted in. And you can go on and on and on. There's food issues, and that is also being air freighted in on a daily basis. So that, again, it is understandable. I get why people would want to see the most drastic possible measure being taken. But at the same time, there is in governance a responsibility to balance all of the sides of the equation and try to make as sensible and sound a decision on the best possible evidence and advice that we have.
You spoke about hotels and airlines. What about the restaurants?
The situation with the restaurants, again, must remain fluid. And I thank you for the question because it is important. I would want to urge people involved in that type of business now to rely on a little bit of creativity. Let us use, for example, the opportunity to see how best we can, where we do not yet do it, develop takeout, that's what you call it, yeah, takeout, and home deliveries. There are a number of restaurants in Barbados which do not now do that. And quite frankly, if I could just give you an example, there may be some people who are dislocated in the taxi business that will be willing to work in partnership with a restaurant so as to facilitate that kind of takeout, that kind of delivery and takeout. I think it is important for us to realize that out of this dark cloud can come a lining of creativity and some, for want of a better way of putting it, legacy benefits in terms of how we reassess the way in which we do business. Clearly, it would not be advisable to have restaurants packed to capacity with people because, you know, we have come to the point where we don't want more than 25 people in a room at one time. But we can do it sensibly. Right now, I was just doing a head count, and we are at 26 people in this room. But the reality is that you all are practicing a good amount of social distancing, and it's a big room, and don't get frightened, it's a big room, and you're apart from each other. But the reality is that, you know, I think that we can do this sensibly, and an element of self-policing is really what is important. I think that every Barbadian must recognize that we have a role to play in making sure that we don't increase the in-country transmission, and therefore you have to do that in a responsible and measured way. But at the same time, we want to make sure that people can still continue to keep their businesses going. And I think that the Czar spoke to this matter with regard to supermarkets yesterday when he asked for people who are managing supermarkets to better police the situation. So you don't want to close the supermarket, but at the same time you want to make sure that you manage the amount of people who are doing throughput at any one time.
Are there any other vessels coming in? Because you spoke about air and restaurants and hotels. What about ships?
I don't think that we have any more that are I think all of the itineraries which were truncated have now been resolved. And I think we've come to the point where those ships will either remain at anchor off Barbados or alternatively go back from whence they came in due course. Bear in mind that the cessation to international cruising was for a month beginning Friday before last. So we're already into the second week of that. So it will not be long again. There's a ray of optimism on the part of the airline industry. British Airways, for example, had indicated to me that they will recommence their service to Barbados on the 16th of April. The cruise line industry is looking to recommence their services internationally within a 2 or 3 week period. But again, as I said, that is just optimistic. And a lot depends not only on what happens here, but what happens globally, because quite frankly, we're all in a very fluid and rapidly changing situation.
Okay, how has Barbados' decision to take in the cruise ships when nobody else would help or hurt its reputation, and what are some of the benefits or ramifications for doing that?
I think that all of it is positive. I don't think that there's been any negatives for Barbados in terms of our relationships for partnering with the cruise lines as we did. The fact of the matter is that, first of all, we honored contracts that we had to honor internationally. The reality is that once you get into the home porting business, you are by law required to carry out certain levels of responsibility. It isn't only that you get the benefit of the ships coming here and you getting the advantage of an opportunity to make money off of provisioning it, et cetera, and people depart from here so that the airport makes a lot of money off of air-sea transfers and so on. There's also a little burden that you have to carry sometimes, and that burden is that you have to take your responsibility for the ships that that home port out of your shores. That is point number one. Point number two is that we stood on a humanitarian basis in a way in which I think the international world has come to respect and admire. There were some countries which took a completely opposite position and almost chased ships away from their shores. The reality is that I saw as recently as last night a WhatsApp of the Azura leaving Barbados And lit up on the side of it was, "Thank you, Barbados, we'll see you again," or words to that effect. And you know, there is a sense in which I think, as I said to the BHTA a couple of days ago, we are now in a position where we can come out of this and take ownership of, let's speak about the cruise sector, take ownership of an industry where we have always only been on the receiving end. We now have people who see us as partners that are trustworthy and have begun to express their willingness to have discussions on expanding the type of relationship they have with us. So that at long last, the idea of a Southern Caribbean Cruise Alliance where in summertime, not only in wintertime, but in summertime, there can be a cruise itinerary that allows for Barbados to be at the centerpiece of it, and we link with several other countries as opposed to the cruise ships going into the Mediterranean, where they now go in summer, is an option which is apparently on the table. And again, I feel that it is something that we must see as an opportunity. We have to see it as a benefit from the posture that we have taken. And again, down the road, it can only speak towards offering significant commercial opportunity to the country and employment benefits as well.
One clarification I would like Mr. Lane to make. He spoke earlier about the people leaving en masse, but what about the workers at the airport in relation to their protection?
Thank you for the question. From the outset, we have taken the steps to ensure that our workers at the airport, both Gaia Inc., but also the general airport community, have been exposed to sensitization from the Ministry of Health. We would have started that in January, continuing with several sessions into February and March. We would have had the benefit of direct consultations with the COVID czar, Mr. Carter, speaking to us, our workers, as well as our partners at the airport in terms of the government's response, but also some queries or some questions with regards to the use of personal protective equipment, which I know has made the media. We've made the decision that we're going to allow persons to understand the risks and the benefits of using such equipment, make sure that they're trained appropriately, and then make it optional if they choose to utilize them. But I mean, that's just one part of the many things that we've been doing in terms of protecting our workers. As the Minister would have mentioned with regards to the cruise customers who were stranded, I think yesterday we did something that had never been done before in terms of how we were able to get the customers off the ships and into the airport without them commingling with the other persons that were there. And we were looking at 3,000 people not mixing with another couple thousand people. It tells you that, number one, we're taking our responsibility seriously, but also it speaks to the testament of the workers at the airport. So I mean, we have taken the steps necessary. We have made sure that they are safe. I spoke about the hand sanitizers previously, and a lot of sessions on personal hygiene and some measure of distancing. So I know it's made the news. I want to reassure Barbadians that we do take the lives of not just Gaia Inc., but the over 2,000 people that work at the airport. We take their health and their life very seriously, and we've done all that we can, and we're continuing to do what we can to make sure that they feel safe as they welcome people to our shores. One thing, if the Minister will permit me, in regards to when he spoke on how Barbados is being viewed with the cruise ships, I can tell you I've had lots of discussions in the last week or so with other international airlines as well, who are being used to repatriate the customers that were stranded in the cruise ship. And as the Minister said, it's looked upon very, very, very favorably. Persons have responded positively. They've spoken to the fact that Barbados as a whole has been able to facilitate them being able to put on charters and make landing rights and landing slots available in times and in a duration that they have not seen with other airports. And it speaks to the testament of what we have here in Barbados. And as the Minister said, I think it It can only benefit us after we come through this crisis, where not only ships but other airlines who may not have called Barbados home because of how we've been able to come together as a country and work, may say, you know what, let's give Barbados a chance, because the people and the infrastructure and the apparatus there is beneficial to us. So thanks.
Back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I know it's early days yet, but with a lot of the flights being suspended by Monday, in terms of the workers at the airport, what measure would it be doing shorter hours now? What kind of measures can we expect for staff at the airport?
Well, I don't want to speak to specifics because we have a special meeting that I have to report to my board on, and I have a responsibility to report to them first. But obviously, the flight changes do affect the airport. Not only Guy Inc. is about 500 people. Between concessionaires and ground handlers and everything else, we're looking at, I think the last estimate was almost 4,000 people, which are going to be directly affected. So obviously, I can speak specifically on what we're doing for our workers, is that we are looking at several options to ensure that there's little to no displacement. In terms of our concessionaires, we're examining how we can help to, I think as the Prime Minister said on Friday night, keep their head above water. That's correct, right, Minister? We're working with the airlines to see how we can ensure that they see Barbados as a preferred partner. So from the airport's point of view, we have a responsibility to several persons and several entities, and we have been working feverishly to make sure that we have a plan that protects our workers, but also protects our partners to the best extent that we can.
At the close of this winter season, according to the preliminary estimates in dollars and cents, how significant are the losses going to be in dollars and cents?
I couldn't tell you that yet because it really is too early. As I indicated, there's going to obviously be a number of closures. I anticipate that it will be a considerable knock-on effect across the economy. And, you know, we do not know when this comes to an end. Let me say to you, though, that while we anticipate or plan for the worst, we are hoping for the best. I would imagine that if you say just simply the end of winter, you might be being a little bit optimistic, because I suspect that this will drag on into part of the summer as well. That is just to be realistic. For the government, the most important issue really is the well-being of the people of the country, which ironically takes me back to this question of borders. We had and have to find a way or maintain a way of being connected to the rest of the world. And we had to do this simply because, as I asked Terry only this morning, you know, how much medication is shipped into this island? A considerable amount of it. If we close, we can't access that. How many pieces of hospital equipment and other medical related equipment is shipped into the island? By air, substantial amounts. Not able to easily do it otherwise. In a time of crisis, the way of getting things to Barbados, which doesn't produce any of these things on its own, has to be via air. And that is really what our real concern has always been. How best do we protect people's lives, protect people's well-being, protect people's livelihood, if we do not make sure that we use the airport as a tool or an instrument for the greater good of the community. In terms of the raw dollars and cents, it would be a guess. I really could not tell you because it is really too early to say what we expect the totality of the financial fallout to be. But as you would have heard the Prime Minister say, we have now try to create a counter-cyclical approach to this, and to the extent that the tourism sector, which was the major driver of the economy, is being brought to a halt, then we want to stimulate other types of activity, for example, in construction, for example, in agriculture, and all other areas that we can as a means of generating activity elsewhere while this situation continues. I should also say that for me, and again for the sector, I see this as an opportunity for us to use the downtime creatively. And that the Barbados Hotel Tourism Association, the Barbados Tourism Marketing Incorporated, must now look at ways in which not only do they come back into the marketplace more aggressively and more competently, but equally how we do so in a more competitive way. And it means that we now have to use the Tourism Development Act, which is already an existing piece of legislation, but it has never really been used as a developmental tool. Now to be treating it as a developmental tool, which will allow for people who are in the sector to reinvest in the sector, not just financially, but also in terms of training of staff, in terms of reviewing and enhancing the product that we have on the island. I have made heavy weather about the fact that we have to try to make sure that we do not lose the attractions that we have during this crisis, but to preserve them as best as possible. And yes, I know the challenge is that to preserve them, it means that people have to go to them, but you're limited in terms of the amount of gatherings. But these are the things that we have to seriously look at, because I think that once we can revise those things that we did and have done in the past, and to try to find a way of doing them better, and to find ways of reinvesting into the industry, then the industry can sustain this and come out more competitively.
If we move on to Stage 3, God forbid, what does Barbados look like in terms of travel and commerce?
Barbados will look a lot like what you see happening in some parts of the United States. California is completely on lockdown. I think New York now has come to that point. It will look a lot like what you saw happen in some parts of Asia when they went on complete lockdown. And the way in which we avoid that is being very sensible about our movement about the country and the type of in-country transmission that will lead to that stage. Again, I must use this opportunity, as I think every other minister who's addressed the country is using the opportunity, to urge Barbadians to be as cautious and as sensible as possible in maintaining the social distancing. If there's anything that we've learned about this virus, is that when human beings stay a certain distance from each other, the virus cannot spread. And once the virus is not spreading, then it gives it a chance to die. And you are not getting to the stage where you have these vast escalations and increases in numbers of people that you now have around the world. We want to avoid that as best as possible.
And I understand you think, Barbados is not like a totalitarian society. I know you don't want to, or the government may not want to tell people, you can do this, you can do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. But is there any...
But if the time came that we had to tell people that you can't do this and you can't do that, rest assured we would have to tell people you cannot do this or cannot do that.
But at this point as well, it seems as though people are really looking to the government to say, can I still go to my salon? Can I still go to the barber? Should, people, is there any plan to outline at least a broad list of things that Barbadians should do and should not do during this period?
I don't think there's a plan to outline a list of things that you should or shouldn't do, because I don't think we'd ever capture every single thing. What we've asked people to do is to exercise good judgment and common sense, with which we are all blessed. I question, for example, the wisdom of holding some of the FET type activities that I gather had been being held. And I would want to think that now we have heard what might have happened, that people would want to rethink that type of activity. But basically, to use your judgment as best as possible and maintain the social distancing, because irrespective of what the activity is, there are Barbadians who have never missed church for years, but they're missing church today. largely because of the fact that you are exercising good judgment. And I think that that is important for us to do.
Minister, you're looking at the
Not
construction.
that it's important for us to mischurch. It is important for us to exercise good judgment.
Right. Based on what you're saying about the importance of construction, and yet at the same time the limiting the limitation not on our part of tourism activities, what is the next step forward regarding the proposed construction of the Hyatt complex in the city?
The Prime Minister addressed that on Friday and indicated that there are some, again, as part of the counter-cyclical activity, we are encouraging commercial activity to still take place and construction activity to still take place. And yes, the Hyatt has been named as one of them. My understanding is that there are no further prohibitions or barriers towards that beginning, and we should see movement relatively soon. Let me also say, again, the question will be asked by people who sit down and think through these things, as they should. Well, how are you going to have activities of a commercial nature taking place, even as we are trying to limit the amount of people who are coming into an area at one time? I think that GIS, and perhaps this answers your question, sir, GIS will undoubtedly be issuing a message on these matters very shortly. In addition to that, I do know for a fact that the Ministry of Health, for example, has itself also begun to compile a protocol on some of these things. As recently as yesterday, the Ministry of Health indicated to me that they're working on a protocol, for example, on how you do the cleaning of rooms and certain areas where, for example, people are being quarantined or people have been identified as being positive and had been located, so as to preserve your own safety, but actually also make sure that it is safe for other people as well. Remember that a lot of this was not anticipated 5 or 6 months ago. And as fast as we have been moving and trying to stay ahead of the curve, there are obviously limitations in terms of manpower and human resource ability that Barbados has. And so we can't do everything at one time. But I do believe that you will see from the Government Information Service some advisory messages on how we may best go about some of the activities that we have to continue to go about in order to make sure that people can still continue to work in this country. Because if you just came to a screeching halt, that may solve the problem or appear to solve a problem for a week, but it does not solve the problem a month from now. In fact, it may actually exacerbate that problem.
Okay. Mr. Lane.
Yes.
Earlier you mentioned that the Grantley Adams Airport did something that it never did before, but you didn't go into details about what exactly that was.
Oh, that was in reference to being able to move cruise ship passengers from the port directly into a facility at the airport and maintain a degree of separation to ensure there was no commingling. So it was a logistical first for us, and in close cooperation with the Port Authority and our airline and ground handling partners.
Okay, is that it? Nothing further? Going, gone. Okay, well, let me thank all of you for giving up part of your Sunday for the opportunity to participate in this. I hope that it has been to some extent useful, and obviously the government will continue through a variety of voices to keep you updated on all matters relating to the COVID-19 situation as the need arises, and as and when ever we have that need arise, we will certainly seize the opportunity to do so in faithful execution of the commitment given by the Prime Minister herself. Thank you. Have a good day. And stay safe.